Okay, so as you know, we're doing the inner court, and we're studying the double letters, which, from the Sefer Yetzirah perspective, is the inner court of who we are. And we studied Bet as the first of the seven, and then we also studied Gimel as the second, and now we're on to Dalet. Dalet is very special in this series because it represents the foundation energy of wisdom, or what is called Hakmah, and of course the transpose of wisdom being folly. But before I get to that, let's say it's the third day of the week. So we all know the first day of the week is Sunday, today. The second day of the week is Monday. So the energy letter that's dominant in the third day of the week is Dalet. And its planetary influence is Mars. But I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the third day of the week or Mars. I would like to spend a little time on this idea of wisdom and folly. So the part of the nervous system and the brain specifically that we're discussing in this series that the Dalet pertains to is the amygdala. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's close. I think you get what I'm saying. So we're going from the outer portion of the brain to the inner portion of the brain. And remember, we talked about the Mishkan. We talked about the menorah and the Mishkan having 7 branches. And it was ordered by God that it would be made from just one piece of gold. Couldn't be welded or anything like that. So there was one piece of gold made into 7 branches. So obviously, this is the third branch going from the outer to the inner. Closest in the brain, in our inner court, we're going from the outer, which we talked about, the putamen, and then the globus pallidus, and now the amygdala, which is very close to the thalamus, which is in the center of our brain. So we understood that Bet gives us space in the inner court, in the holy place, as it's called in the Torah. So the Holy of Holies is beyond space and time, and then we go beyond that into space and time. So Bet creates space, and Gimel, there begins order. So now we're talking about Dalet, and we're talking about a door. Dalet represents like a door. That's easy to remember because it sounds like a D sound. But the door is this opening to what we call Hakmah consciousness. So Hakmah consciousness on the tree of life, Hakmah is the most attainable, the highest level of awareness, and it's wisdom. Hakmah means wisdom, but wisdom not in an intellectual sense, but wisdom in an experiential sense, right? So this wisdom that we gain from Hakmah consciousness is simply about opening a door. So what we call in our meditation, hit boded, has 2 Dalets in it. So this hit boded experience that we're having in mindlessness meditation is happening in the brain. Consciousness is emanating from the Holy of Holies and into the inner court of who we are in our nervous system, and we're experiencing it. We're experiencing it first on the level, the finest relative. So remember last week I said, we're going in this way. When you first learn meditation, we drew this upside down pyramid, right? And we talked about going from the conscious thinking level to the subconscious thinking level to pure consciousness. And when we do that, we call it transcending. we're going to finer and finer levels of relative in the inner court, finer and finer, until we transcend relative altogether, and we find ourselves in the Holy of Holies. But as we're transcending, we're experiencing finer states of relative. This examination of the double letters and the inner court is going the other way. There's always running and returning going on, right? But we're going from the Holy of Holies into the inner court, and then maybe we'll examine the outer court with the 12 elementals. But what we're saying here is we're going from the absolute, pure consciousness, into this inner court where there's space and order, right? So in that space and order is where in our inner court we have feeling, the very transcend. As we get finer and finer levels of thought, we have the experience of feelings and emotions, okay? So I want to read just a little thing. You know, I've been using that book by Dr. Tony Nader and other sources on the brain, and I just pulled this off and printed it on the amygdala. It's spelled Amy Gadala, Amygdala. And here Dr. Nader says, your amygdala is a small part of your brain, but it has a big job. It's a major processing center for emotions. It also links your emotions to many other brain abilities. Memories, learning, the senses. And when it doesn't work as it should, it causes to contribute to disruptive feelings and actual physical symptoms. So, if we're talking about getting closer to the thalamus, and we're talking about this amygdala and wisdom and emotions, and opening this door, how does this all pull together in terms of our meditation and what real wisdom is? So I just want to say that, so in the Sefer Yetzirah, where it says that the things that I'm speaking, it says in the Sefer Yetzirah, if you took the class, you'll know, but it says that Gimel is the energy, that Dalet is the energy of Mars, and that it's the third day, and that its foundation is Chachma, which is wisdom, and its transpose is folly, and that is written in this Sefer Yetzirah as Ivelet, Aleph Vet Lamed Tav, Ivelet. Now there's a lot of words for folly all over the Hebrew language, and foolish and so on, and even in the Torah there's other words for it. But it's used as Ivelet also in Proverbs and also in other parts of the Torah, but there are other words also in Proverbs for it. So I wouldn't ignore any of those words and look more deeply into it. But if we look at Ivelet, if you would go to a modern translation, they often say Ivelet in that spelling to mean because, which I found really kind of interesting, right? But as we're looking at wisdom and Chachma consciousness, which is critical to our meditation and everything, it's what our path is leading us to, this experience in the inner court of Chachma consciousness. I want to say that the difference between wisdom and folly, especially in the religious world, has been greatly misunderstood, at least based on Abulafian form of Kabbalism. So in the spiritual world, we think of wisdom and folly mostly like wisdom is following instruction, and folly is just doing your own thing. So when I want to say with Chachma or wisdom in that religious sense, it's like if it says it in the good book, and you don't do it, or you don't believe it, or you don't hold that to be truth, or your rabbi said it, or your pastor said it, or the Dalai Lama said it, regardless of what you feel and what you think, you need to do that. You're the boss, the book is the boss, the rabbi's the boss, the pastor's the boss, and wisdom is following that instruction. Folly is following your own spiritual path. So beating to a different drummer, and you'll see this sort of expressed in a lot of books and a lot of teaching. And there's some truth to it, right? Can't ignore that there's some truth to that. It's sort of like kindergarten spirituality. It's important. When you're raising kids, you want them to listen to you. Why do you want them to listen to you and not do whatever they feel like? Because their prefrontal cortex and their amygdala is not completely formed. So you have a situation where you tell the kid, don't put your hand in the fire. Now, when they really learn or have wisdom is when they actually put their hand in the fire. Then they'll never do it again. But you hope that they don't have to get burned. You tell them what to do and they don't do it. But at some point, every parent wants their child to think for themselves, to have an existential experience where they actually weigh out the good and the bad and hope from their experience that they choose the good. Well, in this case, I'm suggesting that if you go back to the study we did on the Shema, what the Torah is telling us is hear, listen. Listen to the sound that's coming from the Holy of Holies into the inner court. And that sound that's coming from the Holy of Holies into the inner court is the finest vibration, emanation of the Holy of Holies, the finest relative. And that opens the channels, it opens the door of Hakmah, wisdom. And then the experience, coupled with Binah, understanding, is where real knowledge comes from. So we talked in the past about Shecher, meaning lie, and Emet, meaning truth. And Emet is Aleph, Mem, Tav. The beginning, the middle, and the end. It's holistic, completely inclusive. It doesn't just take the end, or it doesn't just take the beginning, or combine the beginning with the end without the middle. It's being able and pliable enough to accept the beginning, the middle, and the end, and not being rigid about what we just see, right? So what I'm saying is, mature Abulufi and Kabbalist will be the opposite of the idea that we have a rigid understanding of what it says in some book or what some sage said is the truth. An Abulufi and Kabbalist may find that to be true after he experiences it by being in surrender to the sound. And the real wisdom, what folly is not so much going your own way or thinking your own thing. Folly is really the rigidity of thinking you know the whole truth. or that it's written somewhere, or that because Bear said it, or Bob said it, or Rabbi Ashlag said it. It's an experience where one surrenders and is pliable. So it goes back to neuroplasticity. If we ourselves are rigid in something, how can we expect our brains not to be rigid? But if we're in the state of unknowing, then we can know. It's a paradox. The more I know, the less I know. Does that make some sense? In some paradoxical way to you? So what I'm saying is that neuroplasticity is really something that we have to sort of accept. And when we accept that and we hear that still small voice that comes from the Holy of Holies within us, and it becomes understood in the inner court and then the outer court, that's what wisdom is. So I'll end with just a very brief thought from Proverbs. A wise one will hear and thereby increase his learning and also discernment, and he will acquire to understand parable and epigram. So we are a receiver of the flow of pure consciousness from the Holy of Holies. When we hear, we're a receiver of wisdom, and then we can have binah, understanding. So that's the door. So in our meditation, really what we're doing is just opening the door. Pulling back the curtain from the Holy of Holies and allowing the consciousness to flow. And not being rigid in thinking what we think to know. Just think about the tragedies that religions have caused. The Crusades, bombing of the Twin Towers, because people thought they knew what they knew was God's truth. There was no neuroplasticity in those things. So we're open. That's our meditation. We're just witnesses. And the door eventually opens wider and wider and wider. And pure consciousness flows more and more and more. And then we see it within ourselves and outside of ourselves. So we sing a song that resonates within our homes, within our communities, and within the universe.